Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to chapter one. I'm doing this a little bit out of order, hence the different hairstyle. So I'm not really sure where we left off. I think this should be your third video. You should have just done the basics. So now we are jumping into cells. So what is a cell? Uh, think of a prison cell. Right? Think of a prison. A really big building made up of itty bitty teeny tiny little cells, right? Prison cells. Well, that's what your body's kind of like too. It is one big building or one big body made up of a bunch of teeny tiny little areas called cells. Same as a prison, right? It's the same idea, except instead of having people inside of these cells, we are going to have little structures called organelles, and they are all going to have jobs to do to keep you alive. So that's what we are talking about today. So let's jump into the notes. And there are two different kinds of cells that we're going to care about today. We call them prokaryotes and eukaryotes, or prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Before we get into it, let's talk about a little theory. Yes, turns out cells are a theory. No, not the existence. We know cells exist. That is a fact. But there are a few things that still count as theory. Theory number one, all living things are composed of cells. Fact is, every living thing that we've been able to study is made up of cells. There's no guarantee that we've discovered everything though. So still a theory. Two, cells are the basic units of structure and function in all living things, meaning, let's break these words down. Units of structure. That means this is what you are made out of. So your kidneys have their own specific kidney cells. Your liver has its own specific liver cells. Your brain has its own specific brain cells. We call neurons. Get the idea. And function. Those cells have their own job to do. Your kidneys only do kidney jobs. Your liver cells only do liver jobs. You get the idea now? Cool. And the third theory is new cells are going to be produced from existing cells, meaning you cannot create a cell. All you can do is take an already existing cell and allow it to reproduce. It's the only way we know of to get cells. Right? Those are your cell theories. Those are three things you need to understand going into this for the rest of the school year. So let's break this down. We got three different things on this picture. We got eukaryote. I know the words are blurry. Just go with me on this. We have eukaryotic cells, prokaryotic cells, and viruses, which I crossed off because viruses are not cells. They're not even made of cells. They're too small. They're just made of proteins. We'll talk about that, what proteins are in a little bit. So these do not actually count as living things since all living things are made of cells. So viruses are not alive. We're only talking about cells today. So let's start with prokaryotic cells. They are smaller and simpler than eukaryotes. What does that mean? Simple? Does it mean easy? No, it means there's less things. Look how small they are compared to it. They can't fit as much stuff in there, so they have less things going on for them. That's what we mean by simple. So what do they have? They don't have a lot. Well, one, all right. Actually, I don't like this picture. Let's get a new one. That's better. So one, they have ribosomes. Look closely. Look, I can't zoom in on this. So you're gonna have to you're on a phone, bring your phone closer to your face, all right? And see these little circles floating around in there, right? Those are called ribosomes. What do? They make proteins. What do I mean by that? What are proteins? We'll talk about it. Just right now, know they make things for you, all right? You're gonna have DNA. This stuff floating around, your genetic code. You're not a prokaryote, but it's the bacteria here's genetic code. You have your own DNA with your own genetic code. Cytoplasm is shown yellow here. It's this liquidy goop all this stuff is floating around in. And the cell membrane around the outside is keeping all of this stuff in. This particular picture has a cell membrane and a cell wall and something called a capsule, right? All holding it together, but I'm caring right now about the cell membrane, this innermost layer here. What do they not have? Nuclei, plural for nucleus. Nucleus is something used to hold the DNA in. It does not have it. The DNA is out here floating free. or any membrane-bound organelles. I already said the word organelle today. What's an organelle? It is something inside your cells that have a job to do. This guy doesn't have those. So, pretty simple. An example, like I already said, is bacteria. There are all different kinds of bacteria, some of them good, some of them bad, but they're all prokaryotes. Jumping up to eukaryotes. This is what you are made out of. So remember that, guys. You are made out of eukaryotes. That's how I always remember it. And they are larger and more complex. And again, complex, what does that word mean? Does it mean bigger? Some people think it does. No, it doesn't. Complex does not mean bigger. It's larger and it's more complex. That's two different things. Complex means more stuff, right? It doesn't mean harder. Some people think it means harder. It can be harder with more things. For instance, look down here. This is a watch. It has a whole bunch of moving parts in here. It's very complex, but it's also very small and very easy to read. This next to it is a sundial. Not very complex. It's two pieces, right? It's this slab and a thing sticking off the slab. That's it. Not complex. It can be difficult to read and very large, but it's not complex. So eukaryotes are complex. They have more things happening on the inside. So if they have more things, what do they have? They do have everything we've already talked about in the prokaryotes. That's right, guys. Prokaryotes tend not to have things that eukaryotes don't have. If we already talked about it, eukaryotes have it. So they have DNA, and they have ribosomes. They have cytoplasm so that stuff can float around in it. And they have a cell membrane holding it all in. But wait, there's more. We also have nuclei. Over here, this kind of a weird thing here is a nucleus. It's holding all your DNA in place so it doesn't get all damaged by all the organelles. And it has other membrane-bound organelles that are going to have jobs to do. And I'm not writing them all here because we're going to go down the list in a little bit. Interesting fact, though, some of those organelles used to be other prokaryotes. That's right. Once upon a time, this is a weird story here. Once upon a time, some of your cells' insides, some of your cells' innards used to be its own prokaryotic cell. And then a eukaryote gobbled it up, just ate it. And instead of getting dissolved and digested away, it stuck around and it started performing jobs. And it worked really well. Your mitochondria is one of those things. You may have heard of this, the powerhouse of the cell. That's right, because it needed to make energy for itself to live. Now it doesn't need the energy for itself because it's inside your cell. It's safe, it's comfortable, it doesn't need the energy. So it gives the energy to your cell, and now your cell is superpowered. And chloroplast is going to be inside of plants. We're going to talk about that, but that used to be a prokaryote too. All right, so we got two different kinds of cells we're going to talk about today. They usually kind of look different. Like this is going to be the animal cell. They're all different kinds of animal cells. They don't all look like this, but this is the picture I'm using. Same thing for here. Not all plant cells look like this, but this is the picture I'm using. I'm making this very far in advance, so I don't know what paper you're getting or if it's even is a paper. But if from past years, I've had a handout where I've asked people to color the picture in. See where I have red around the outside, and that is the cell membrane. If I provided that for you, or if I made it something that you can print out, I suggest doing that so it helps you study. So you can color this picture in, just the membrane, in the cell membrane section of your notes. What does it do? It protects your cell. One, it's going to keep everything inside nice and cozy, but it's also going to decide what comes in and what comes out. Meaning it's going to regulate transport of nutrients in and out of the cell. What does that mean? That means some things your cell wants in and some things your cell does not want in. If it's something your cell wants in, there may be a certain doorway or protein to allow these nutrients to go from outside the cell to inside the cell, or it may just wrap its membrane around the thing and bring it in. That's kind of a cool trick it does, and we're going to talk about that in a future chapter. But the basics is it decides, hey, this stuff is good stuff. I want it in. So it wraps itself around it, and now it's inside the cell where it can use it. If it doesn't want this thing, if it's a virus or a bacteria doesn't want, then it will just keep it outside. And by the way, guys, if I'm going too fast for you, this is the internet. You have the ability to pause. So, pause and write this stuff down if you have to. I'm moving on. The next thing on your page, if it's the paper I'm thinking, may be nucleus. Skipping ahead here, right? So colored in like this. I decided I'm changing the order. I'm skipping ahead to nucleolus, and then I'll come back to nucleus, okay? So nucleolus, inside the nucleus, and this is where ribosomes are created. Pause, time out, guys. I need to take a side step here. Let's bring it back to my office. All right, so before we move on with this, guys, there's something that we need to talk about, and that is proteins. Proteins. What are proteins? Okay, well, what are proteins? Proteins are things. I know, very scientific, right? Things. If I want to be any more specific than that, then I need to know what kind of protein we're talking about. Proteins all have different kinds of jobs. Some of your proteins are like tools. They are going to help build or break things. We call those enzymes. For instance, if you're lactose intolerant, meaning you can't drink milk because you are missing a certain protein called an enzyme. That protein's job is to break down the sugars in milk so that you can digest it. If you don't have that protein, then you can't digest milk. Then bacteria is going to eat it instead. Then the bacteria is going to start reproducing because they have the food energy to do that. And your immune system is going to think you're sick and treat you like you're sick. So you get sick. So proteins are kind of important. Other proteins are going to be used to build the organelles we're talking about. That's right, guys, the organelles. So your cells are made out of proteins. So wait a minute. If your cells are made out of proteins, but your body is made out of cells, that means your body is made out of proteins. That's right, guys. You are one big walking ball of protein. So proteins must be very important. So we are going into a little story mode to talk about how do we make these proteins and how do we use these proteins. We're only talking about the basics, but we're going to spend the next couple chapters talking about that kind of stuff. So let's go back into this. All right, so nucleolus. This is something that is inside the nucleus and something we've already talked about, ribosomes, these little circles, these little bubbles floating around in there. Those are ribosomes. They have a very important job of making those proteins. The nucleolus is where we make the ribosomes. That's right, we got to build our own tools. We got to build our own builders. So here we see the nucleolus inside the nucleus, and all this purple stuff is the DNA, right? And those are all the different pieces of ribosomes or different pieces of RNA. Ribosomes are actually a type of RNA. It's kind of like DNA, but different. And they're leaving the nucleolus and mixing with all of the DNA. Nucleus, the brain of the cell. That's the nickname of the brain. It's not actually a brain. It doesn't think, but it does hold information. It is going to control most of the cell's processes because it contains the DNA. That DNA is where you hold all of your information. If you still need to write this stuff down, pause now because I'm getting rid of the words for a second. That's right. Inside this red stuff here, where I have going, that's your nucleus. And floating around is your DNA. Kind of looks like this, a bunch of different smaller molecules all interlocked together to make this really big molecule. Double helix shape. And it is your code. It is information. Coded information telling your cells what to do and telling your body how to look. Now remember, all those pieces of RNA that we saw, all of those yellow dots coming out, the pieces of RNA, well, down here, they're now colored in for this picture as red, right? Those are the yellow pieces. And they are meeting up with this DNA And the DNA is telling them what position to show up in and how to look to become full-on RNA. That RNA is going to tell your ribosomes how to build the proteins. So DNA says how to make proteins. It creates a copy of the message out of RNA, and then the RNA goes to take care of business. Surrounding your nucleus is something called a nuclear envelope. It's kind of like a cell membrane, except just for the nucleus, and it's double layered. Right? You have 2 layers of this because it's very important to protect. Right? So a double membrane layer, and it's dotted with pores that allows material in and out of the nucleus. That material is the RNA we just saw get built. So this RNA, we just saw it built as red. Now this picture shows it as yellow again. But once this RNA is built, it's going to leave through these holes in the nuclear envelope. They're just big enough for the RNA, but too small for the DNA. So only the RNA can leave and the DNA stays safe. And the RNA is going to go to the ribosomes that are going to build proteins. These ribosomes are also made out of RNA. So we have RNA that has a message, we call messenger RNA, going to the ribosomes that are made of RNA. So these RNAs can work together, and they're going to work together to assemble proteins, to build your proteins, build up your body. Right? And we got 2 different kinds of ribosomes. We got free ribosomes out here, just floating around in the cell, not attached to anything. Any proteins they make are going to stay float just in your cell. And then attached ribosomes, right here, they look like they're attached to something. It's called the endoplasmic reticulum. That's next. And it is going to make proteins that leave the cell. We'll talk about that later. Zooming in, we see that RNA we saw get made. This blob in the background is the ribosome, these little guys here. And we are seeing them taking these little circles. We're going to talk about these circles next chapter. They are called amino acids. Amino acids are your protein material. And the ribosome is reading this message to figure out how to properly assemble a protein. And like I said, if this ribosome is one of these just floating around aimlessly inside the cell, that's it. Good, you're done. You got your protein. Boom, story's over. You can use the protein to do things. However, if it's an attached ribosome, our story's not done yet. We're going to keep doing something with that protein. This thing, as I've already said, is called the endoplasmic reticulum. I'll give you a second to practice that. Say it out loud, guys. Endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum. We're just going to call it the ER. And we have 2 types of ER. We got the smooth ER and the rough ER. Look over here. Smooth ER has no ribosomes on it, right? So it looks like it's not bumpy at all. It looks kind of smooth, hence the name. It contains enzymes. It stores enzymes once they're made. It has some other jobs to do, but not part of the story. We will talk about in future chapters. For right now, it stores enzymes. The rough ER is what we're talking about. It's called rough because it looks bumpy with all those ribosomes attached to it. And it is going to process the proteins from the attached ribosomes and send it to our next thing, the Golgi apparatus. And what do I mean by process? By process, I mean it is going to look at this protein that was just made and figure out what it's for. And go, oh, you are going to be used to make hair grow. Okay, excellent. So you're going to become a hair protein. So I'm going to chemically label you for the hair so that you know where you need to go. And then it's going to put it into a bubble and send it over to our next organelle called the Golgi apparatus. So here's your bubble, and it just moves on over to our next guy. Now, once upon a time, all cells were single-celled organisms. So this bubble would have just gone to wherever it needed to go in the cell. But now that we're multicellular organisms, our story continues. It needs to spread out, but this bubble is not good enough for spreading out of the cell. So we evolved to have our next organelle pick up the slack. This is the Golgi apparatus, or Golgi complex. some people like to use. What is an apparatus? Honestly, that's just a very fancy, sciencey way of saying thing or tool that does a thing, right? So Golgi is the scientist who discovered it. So what it's going to do is take that bubble and make it better. It's going to attach those proteins to fats, which is much more protective, and send it out of the cell so it can be used later on someplace else. And here we see that happening in that same animation from before. The bubbles from the ER go to the Golgi, and the Golgi makes a better bubble. And that better bubble is good for attaching to the membrane and letting things out, which is what we saw in this other video where this attaches to the membrane and kicks the proteins out. And now they're going to go to wherever they need to go in the body. And that's it for proteins, guys. That is the story. We're not done yet. Don't pack up. But that's the story of proteins. RNA is made in the nucleolus. They stop by the nucleus to read the DNA, get a message, send a message to the ribosomes for how to make a protein. The ribosomes make that protein. The rough ER says, oh, you belong to this part of the body, and sends it to the Golgi. And then the Golgi apparatus is going to kick it out of the cell. That's the story of proteins. But there's other things in the cell that are important that we need to talk about still. Things that are going to make your cells keep functioning. First one here is called lysosomes, the garbage disposal. That's right, guys. Every big business, every big company is going to need a janitor, right? So this is our janitor. This is our garbage disposal. It's going to break down food. It's going to break down trash. It's going to break down whatever. It's going to break down older organelles. When an organelle dies or gets damaged, the lysosome is going to engulf those pieces and dissolve them, break them down into those original amino acids so that we can reuse them. What are we going to do if, say, it's the Golgi apparatus that gets broken down and destroyed? Well, we're going to make proteins like before and make a new Golgi apparatus out of them. Lysosomes are going to be cleaning the cell. Think, guys, lysosome. What does that sound like? Lysol. It sounds like Lysol, which you use to clean. Lysosome, Lysol, cleaning. The next big important thing going on is the mitochondria. Anyone on the internet probably have heard jokes about mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. It converts energy into something that we can use. So all of that food that you are eating, the carbohydrates, the sugars, are going to go to the lysosomes, get broken down small, but then those small pieces are going to go to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is going to break them down further and make energy out of it to power a cell. Energy. Where's energy coming from? Food. Well, check it out. Here we have some molecules, right, from the food you eat. And no, this is not the right molecules. This is just the animation I had. You'll learn better later, right? And your mitochondria is going to pull on it and rip it apart, and energy is going to come out of where they were connected. That's a thing that happens. No, it's not going to be an explosion, but it is energy. And this energy is going to be used to power everything we've already been talking about. So mitochondria is your powerhouse. Moving on. Now I got two pictures up here, right? This is the animal cell that we've been talking about, and this is a plant cell. Why do I have the plant cell up? Because now it's finally different. Everything up until this point was interchangeable. It could have been plant or animal cell, and everything would have been exactly the same. But now this is where we become different than plants. These things right here are called vacuoles. They're a storage closet. We use it to store extra water. So we don't actually have a glass of water with us. We're going to start getting dehydrated. So your cells dip into their water storage and drink that. And then if you run out of that, that's when you start getting dehydrated. Plants are different because for plants, This is the vacuole. They get a much bigger water storage. I forgot to drop the notes, so here you go. Stores mostly water. Also some other things. You got some salts and carbs and proteins in there as well, but mostly water. Now here's the question. Why is it much larger in plants? Why do they get it? Well, think about it. What do you do when you're thirsty? You go get a glass of water. Duh. Well, can a plant go get a glass of water? No. It doesn't have legs, can't get up and walk around. It needs to wait till the next time it rains. So it may be waiting a very long time. So plant cells get a lot more extra storage, but also it helps support the plant. What do you mean by support? You mean like emotionally, like they're there? No, I mean physical support. Take a look at this GIF and you see, well, you saw a whole bunch of other cells all around it, right, lining up. Well, here's the thing. Plants do not have bones. Plants need to stand up, but they don't have bones to hold them up. So all of this water in this vacuole is going to create water pressure, and all of these different cells are going to press up against each other like a brick wall, and that is going to provide physical support from the water pressure inside all of these vacuoles, and that's what makes a plant stand up straight, and which is why if you don't water your plant, it starts to wilt, it starts to lean over. And when you water it again, it starts to stand back up with water pressure. Okay, and you will notice that I took away the animal cell for this one because this next one, animals do not have. And by the way, in science, we count as animals because we're not plants, right? We have the same type of cells as all the other animals. And we do not have this next organelle. Plants have everything we have and more. They have a cell wall because, again, they don't have a skeleton. So this cell wall is going to provide a little extra support and protection. They don't have the ability to get out of the way of danger, so they're extra armored. This cell wall is made of a special kind of sugar called cellulose. Remember this ose, guys. Ose at the end. All sugars end with ose. So cellulose is a special kind of sugar. No, it's not a sugar that we can eat well, right? We can't digest it very well. It is wood. That's right. Wood is made out of a sugar called cellulose that we do not want to eat, which is why we started cooking our food to soften that up. So cellulose is what makes up wood and paper. And one more organelle that plants have and we do not have is called a chloroplast. I know, funny word, right? Chloroplast. This is what makes photosynthesis happen. Oh, I'm sure you've heard this word before. I don't think you could have gotten out of middle school without knowing this one. Photosynthesis. This is what plants do to make food. Where they stand out in the sun and they take that energy and they somehow turn it into food. Guys, we're gonna have a whole chapter on the ins and outs of how that works, but know that plants can do that. Plants can take energy, I should have been a T, take energy from sunlight and turn it into food. Now you'll notice that I made everything red up until this point. Now I changed the color to green. That's important. That's a standout thing because it is full of a very special protein. There's that protein again doing a thing. Protein called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll's job is to simply be green. And green color does a very good job of attracting sunlight. So it is a green pigment whose job is to absorb sunlight. And here is a better picture of that chloroplast. Again, we're going to go into more detail much later, but you will see light. There's shining down on it from over here, and it's turning that energy into sugar molecules. And when the plant gets hungry, it will eat those sugar molecules. Its mitochondria will break it down for energy. But if you eat that plant, you'll get these sugar molecules, and then your mitochondria will be able to break it open for energy. So we cannot go through photosynthesis because we do not have this organelle to make sugar, but we can eat the plant and get the sugar. But that is something we talked about in the last set of notes and something we're going to talk about again in a future set of notes. But that's it for now. So for now, jump back into Google Classroom, see if I left you any work to do, and I will see you in the next chapter.